in Deep Geek Live. Welcome, especially if you're watching live in the chat. Also, welcome if you are watching later. Today, we are looking at A Dream of Spring, the final part of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. In particular, what we're doing is we're looking at how will all of this end? We know the story so far. We've had what's happened show, we know where the clues are in the books, but what's the end game for all of this? So that's what we're looking at today. As always, I'm going to frame this around my patrons' questions. I'll pick up as many questions as I can from the chat as I'm going through. This time, perhaps more than most times, my patrons' questions are varied. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a whole series of questions about lots of different areas of A Song of Ice and Fire and where the whole story may end. So we're going to dot about a little bit. I hope that's okay. But we will try and get as much detail in as we possibly can as we go. Okay, guys, let's start off. Well, first of all, Stephen Lucy, thank you so much for the super chat, saying appreciation super chat as a thank you for all the great content on both channels. Missed the last few streams, looking forward to this one. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Let's get started with a question from the Stark in Winterfell, who says, do you think the other members of young Griff's team will be important? Do you think we will find out who Lemore and Heldon are, and why Tyrion isn't the only one who must needs hide? So this is a question about Aegon, or the young Griff who Tyrion sort of teams up with and goes on a boat down the River Royne for a while, who has a team around him. Eventually, he reveals himself to be Aegon, the apparent heir to the Iron Throne. Many people think he probably isn't, which is why I call him Fagon. I will do a video on all of this at some point in the next month or two, which will set out exactly what I think on all of this. But in terms of the question here, whether we will find out who his kind of supporting cast are. One of them we know already. So we've got young Griff is this guy called, who claims he's Aegon. Griff, or old Griff, is John Connington, who used to be the hand to the king to Aerys II. We get this kind of reveal about who he is. There is a lot of speculation who Scepter Lemore might be, and there's also Haldon, the half maester, because he's got like half a chain, who is being his sort of maester. And all of these people are training this person up to be the next king of the Seven Kingdoms, to be a good king. Now, the question is, will we find out who those people are? Possibly is the short answer. I think it's probably slightly more likely we'll find out who Scepter Lemore is than Haldon. I think he is almost certainly just exactly who he says he is. He's somebody who was at the Citadel, didn't quite make the grade, but has got a lot of learning and is loyal to the cause, so to speak. So I think he's who he says he is. Will we learn who these other people are? Well, possibly, but I don't think that's the main point here. The main point is the fact that we have got this character who claims to be the heir to the throne, and so that is who we're going to build from, rather than who the people surrounding them are. The role of the people surrounding them, there are two roles, really. The first role is to train him. This is quite an important thing from Varys's perspective, to train this person to be this idealized king, to understand and be wise and know the small folk and all the rest of it. So there's that aspect. And then the second aspect is to provide some legitimacy. If you look at, say, John Connington, he adds a degree of legitimacy because of the fact that he was Hand of the King. He was one of the closest people to Rhaegar Targaryen. So he is in there. We will see, I suspect, a lot more people emerge over the next over the next book, The Winds of Winter, who can add some degree of legitimacy there. So we will get people like Darkstar, who will, I suspect, emerge with Dawn, this great sword from House Dayne, and I suspect that he will become a part of the Kingsguard, and that will add a certain legitimacy in some eyes, because obviously Arthur Dayne was part of Aerys II's Kingsguard. So I think that's the role of these characters, twofold: firstly, to teach young Griff, and secondly, to add some legitimacy. 94 Evangelion, thank you so much for the super chat. Saying, have you read any of A Song of Ice and Fire's influences, such as the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series by Tad Williams? Also, thank you for the good content. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. I have read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. It was a long time ago, but I have indeed read it. George R. R. Martin, we talk about influences. He, I think, will probably think of himself as being writing his own story. And yes, there are things that he will draw inspiration from, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily think that we should think of this as like a cut and paste. So clearly, Lord of the Rings, there's a huge influence going on there, some of which he is honoring, some of which he is reacting against. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, I think, is exactly the same. Another one that I mention a lot here, I don't think people give it quite the emphasis that it deserves, is the Farseer series by Robin Hobb. Particularly the first, the Assassin's Apprentice series. I think that there's a huge amount there that George R. R. Martin has drawn inspiration from, particularly the use of the wit. For those who've read it, this is the link, the spirit bond between somebody and their dog or wolf, which allows them to inhabit that wolf. Indeed, there's a scene in that series where the main character, who's a bastard boy brought up in a castle, is killed and dies and is buried, but his spirit lives on in his wolf, and he is brought back. His body is brought back, and then his spirit is brought back into his body from the wolf. And I think that this is a definite influence on what is going to be happening with Jon Snow. So yes, I have read that. I think it's a great series. Tad Williams is a fantastic writer. I think that there are a lot of different influences on A Song of Ice and Fire that we can draw on. Other ones, of course, being stuff like H.P. Lovecraft with the Cthulhu stuff that draws all the way through, particularly through the Ironborn story and Euron and things like that. I think that we can see a huge amount of, huge amount of that going on there as well. George R. R. Martin is not somebody to cut and paste from one story into his own. What he does is he takes inspiration from a huge number of different stories and then takes that as his starting point and then creates his own story. Okay, so let's go over to, and yeah, I see a few people giving a bit of love for Robin Hobb's books. I would absolutely, I applaud that. I think they're fantastic stories. And George R. R. Martin, I think still on most of those, his recommendation is on the cover, where I think that he calls Robin Hobb's books a diamond in a sea of zircons, which I think is a wonderful way of praising a story. Tronic over on Patreon, hi Tronic, says, Robert, every single one of us geeks that are in deep with A Song of Ice and Fire do think that George R. R. Martin is marvellous at creating worlds and stories, but might not be able to end them. Well, at least not this. George R. R. Martin is 70 without wishing to be macabre. I don't want it to happen, but what if it doesn't get finished? I really hope he has a bit of Melisandre in him to finish every single thing that he wants to do. So do you think that he's got a way of wrapping it all up and getting it done? By the way, brand new Patreon member and my first question, so apologies, we can't keep the question as short, just like George R. R. Martin. Well, first of all, thank you so much for becoming a patron. I very much appreciate that. I think, well, obviously, he's not getting younger. I think that he is very close to the end of the Winds of Winter. I've said this many times before, and every time I say it, it's more accurate. So it will happen at some point soon, the Winds of Winter. The issue is the last book, A Dream of Spring, which is what we're talking about today. That will, I think, inevitably take at least the same amount of time as the last 2 or 3 books have taken, which is another 6 or 7 years. So yes, at that point we do, without wishing to be macabre, start to think, well, hang on a minute, he is getting a little bit old. I'm more concerned about the Dunk and Egg stories myself. I think that we may not see the end of the Dunk and Egg stories, simply because he said that they will go all the way through to the end of Dunk's life and Egg's life. And if that's the case, then that's probably at least 12 stories, he says. They're both still very young, and there's a lot of stories to tell. So I'm more concerned about that than I am the main story. But yeah, does he have a way of wrapping it all up? I think what he's being very clear on is he's not wanting to be the kind of person who has other people finishing off his stuff. People know roughly how it's going to end, and I think that people will be able to tell us how it was going to end, but let's just keep our fingers crossed that the worst doesn't come to the worst, and he is going to finish it all off. James Barkley, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, sorry, it's off topic. Have you seen that the Benjen Stark actor has been cast as Amazon's Lord of the Rings main villain, possibly Sauron, or do you think he is too old? I did see this, so yeah, so this is a move away from A Song of Ice and Fire over to Lord of the Rings briefly. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but on good sources, the guy who was Benjen Stark in Game of Thrones has been cast in the Amazon series, their Lord of the Rings world spin-off, as the big baddie. Now, what we don't know about this spin, well, there's a huge amount we don't know about this spin-off yet. And I call it a spin-off because it's not a retelling of Lord of the Rings. It is going to be set in the Second Age rather than the Third Age, which is where the Lord of the Rings is set. And that gives us 3,441 years to play with. And the stories take a huge amount of time, take many, many years. Now, the big baddie over that period probably is Sauron. Now, during that time, there's a period when he sort of is in disguise. There's a period when he's sort of in hiding. He takes on sort of a form which is charismatic and beautiful, but he can change forms. So, yeah, I think it's entirely possible. The only thing I would want from a Sauron character in that is somebody to be charismatic. They absolutely have to be, because this is somebody who managed to do astonishing things during that time, persuading people to do stuff that they really, really wouldn't otherwise do. And so I think that the only thing I would want from that actor is for them to be absolutely charismatic. So that's where we're at with that. I did see it. I've not heard it confirmed anywhere, but that it would make sense to me. Just Maura Lee, I think I saw in the chat a moment ago. Um, uh, Thank you very much, Maura. I just wanted to, you did a super chat before we went live, so thank you so much. You know how much I appreciate that. Saying just my usual show of love and support for both of your channels, and my appreciation for all the hard work and passion you put into creating amazing content for all of us to enjoy. So proud to be a patron. Thank you, Maura. I really do appreciate it. Question is, in your last live stream, you answered questions about what we may find in the Winds of Winter. You also think that Howland Reed will make his appearance in the last book, Dream of Spring, and that we might finally get some answers to what truly happened at the Tower of Joy. What other plots, character arcs, etc., do you think we will see in the last book as opposed to the Winds of Winter? What other final revelations? So I think most of the big stories, the big revelations will happen in the final book. I think that that's where we're at. I think that Jon's identity will happen in the final book. I think that the sort of the denouement of all of the stories will happen in the final book. Big characters like Euron and Jon Snow and Daenerys, their character arcs will end in the final book. So that's what we're going to be seeing. The Winds of Winter's meta role is to be bringing everything back in again. What happened over the course of all of the stories we've had so far is that George R. R. Martin has been expanding this story out to be a huge story. And then we get in the Winds of Winter, things are going to start coming back in again. Everybody at the end of it, I suspect, we've got a question about this in a moment, I know, at the end of it, I suspect, will end up in Westeros. And so we're suddenly going to get characters, as we did on the show, we're going to get characters all coming back together, whereas they started together, then they went away, and now they're coming back together. So A Dream of Spring is going to be a lot more focused, and that is where we're going to see the end of everybody's story arcs. We had a question from a few people talk about Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. Yeah, Tom Hiddleston. I've thought Tom Hiddleston many times for Sauron. I think he would be excellent, but I'll trust them for the time being. We'll see. We've got very little information about the Lord of the Rings series so far. Kalisa says, when reading the first chapter of Game of Thrones, it struck me that a theme for Bran was making tough, unpleasant decisions and not turning away. This is when Ned Stark beheads the deserter from the Night's Watch and Bran does not turn away. I know this is a theme that's been explored in depth by many of us already. I originally thought that this might be in relation to the others and sacrificing a large population of people to prevent them from joining the army of the dead. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense that it's to do with the weight of responsibility if you know literally everything, as we assume Bran will at some point in time. Do you think the end of A Song of Ice and Fire will be an ending just tying up the stories for the characters we know, or a larger, more conceptual thematic ending? Well, in answer to that second bit, I think George R. R. Martin's a good enough writer that he can do both. I think that he will provide endings for all of the characters, and I think that he will make that ending a thematic ending. Now, he's very clear, as Tolkien was before him, he is not writing an allegory. He is not here telling us exactly what to think all the time. But there are definite themes going on through Song of Ice and Fire. For example, the role of power and the way that power corrupts, as an example, what war might mean, the impact of war on people, the way that people can ignore the real threats to the world because they're just so focused in on what they're doing. These are these are just some of the themes. There are many, many themes coming out, but these are clear themes that have been emerging from A Song of Ice and Fire. He will tie all of this in together. That I have absolutely no doubt. You were saying about Bran knowing literally everything. Yeah, I mean, I agree to a certain extent that yes, there is an element of what Bran's first chapter, the first proper chapter of A Game of Thrones, is about him seeing leadership and seeing that you have to make some sacrifices if you're going to be in charge. That is definitely there. He will, unless they take the books in a very different way to the show, he will not know everything. What he will have is the ability to go and investigate everything. So the example here is Sam discovered through looking through the books about the marriage of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Bran didn't know about that. When he heard about it from Sam, then he could go back and have a little look and go, oh, yes, so that's what happened. That is Bran's power. It's not Bran suddenly doesn't know everything. Bran has the ability to look for everything. It's the equivalent of Bran suddenly has Google in front of him. It's not that he knows everything that is possibly there on Google. It's just that he can look for everything if he wants to, and he can discover stuff. So that's the way it is, and that is a burden of leadership. Having this ability to understand things and know things, and having to make the decision based upon that information, which will not necessarily work for everybody. Silja Tanner, Celia, perhaps, saying, hi, Robert, just because I love your accent. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Jennifer Wood, thank you so much, saying, do you think George R. R. Martin's other Game of Thrones projects are delaying our long-delayed book 6 and 7? No to book 6. What we've had is a very clear. So George R. R. Martin took a few months off this year. He may or may not have framed it that way, but he every year he goes to Worldcon. This year it was in Dublin, so he came over to London first and then did a little tour of Dublin and Belfast, and he met a few people and all the rest of it. So he took some time off, and he did a lot of interviews during that time, and one of the things that came out was he said what his list of priorities were in terms of delivering things, and he was very clear. Number one is the Winds of Winter. Then he's going to do the next Dunk and Egg. Then I think he said it was the next Fire and Blood, and then it sort of moved on from there. So I don't think that his other projects are in the way of delivering the Winds of Winter. That's next on his list. That's what's going to happen next. So in terms of A Dream of Spring, yes, he's got other things he's going to write before he gets to that. He's been upfront about that. He's going to write another Dunk and Egg story. He's got Fire and Blood Part 2 to do. He may even do a couple of Dunk and Egg stories. Now, that, I mean, whatever you think of that, he at least is being open and upfront about what his list of priorities is. But the Winds of Winter is not going to be delayed by anything else at this moment. Yes, obviously, he's got other things that he's doing. He's a busy man. But in terms of actually writing output, that is his next priority. Okay, so Ana Iglesias is saying, he said Winds, then Dunk and Egg, then A Dream of Spring, then Dunk and Egg again, and then Fire and Blood. So there you go. That's the list. So the short answer, I think, is still the same. The focus is on Winds of Winter. That's happening. Then he's going to do Dunk and Egg, and then A Dream of Spring after that. Bonds says, "Hi, Robert. There are several threads within the books that really need to be answered. The one I want to know concerns the death of Elia Targaryen, Elia Martell, Rhaenys, and baby Aegon. There is some doubt in the books as to whether Aegon was actually killed or was the baby swapped out before the sack of King's Landing. And then doubt whether or not Fagon, who we were talking about earlier, is that child. If he's not that child and Aegon was swapped before the sack of King's Landing, this child is potentially still out there, and that child would have a good claim to the Iron Throne." And then Bond suggests a couple of possible other people like the Hostage and Sam Tarly as possible people who might also be baby Aegon. So my take on this, and as I say, I'm going to do a full video on Fagon and the potential baby swap and all the rest of it at some point within the next month or two. But for those who don't know, when the sack of King's Landing happened, when the Lannisters charged into King's Landing during Robert's Rebellion and they destroyed all of the remnants of the Targaryen rule, one of the things that they did was they got rid of all the Targaryen children. So Elia Martell was killed. Her two children with Rhaegar Targaryen were also killed. Now, the doubt comes in two places. Firstly, that the baby son, who was named Aegon, was killed in such a way that the baby could not be identified. And then later, secondly, we get this character, young Griff, who claims to be that baby who had been sort of swapped just before there was the attack, swapped out. He is that heir to the throne. Now, do we have any evidence on this? Not really, to be honest. The only person who could potentially have done it is Varys. Yeah, he might have done it, but the evidence seems to be, and I will do all of this in my video, but the evidence seems to be that Fagon, young Griff, is actually a Blackfire, not a Targaryen. So he's a part of the family, but from an offshoot a few generations back. So that seems to be who he is. The idea that then that baby isn't him, baby Aegon, the true heir to the Iron Throne, but actually what happened was that Varys did some kind of switcheroo with some other family and left him with some other family. Personally, I don't buy, for the simple reason that I see no evidence for it. Varys, why would Varys swap those babies out and then support a completely different baby for the Iron Throne? No, there's nothing I can see which suggests that happened. I think that there's a reasonable amount of evidence to suggest that young Griff Fagon is not that baby. So I think that the conclusion we have to reach is, tragically, that baby was killed when we thought it was killed. So, sorry, I know, Bonds, this is something you're very keen on. I still haven't seen any evidence that suggests to me that that's the case. Leathery Wings says, "Do you think Varys and or Littlefinger will survive until the end? And if so, what roles do you think they will play?" I think the short answer is no. I don't think either of them will survive. So Varys in the books, he is very much taking supporting young Griff Fagon. That's what he's about. So He's behind the scenes in King's Landing, paving the way for what is an inevitable attack on King's Landing from young Griff's forces. Now, he, I think, will die probably in the same way as it happened on the show, by being burned by Dany's dragon. I think that that's what's going to happen to him. Littlefinger, I can't see him surviving either. I think that he probably will die. Again, probably he will be found out at some point. He will be found out by the Starks. I think there's a good chance that he will indeed head north with Sansa. It won't be the exact same storyline because obviously the whole Ramsay Bolton thing isn't there, but I think he will head north, and I think he will be found out, and I think that he will be killed by the Starks. So I don't think either of them will make it all the way through. Oh, pardon me, all the way through to the end of the books. Jimson Juice, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi Robert, do you think the Iron Throne itself will have the same fate in the final book as it does in the show? Roughly is my short answer. I don't know that it's going to be exactly the same, but I can't see the Iron Throne surviving. The Iron Throne is a metaphor for both Targaryen rule and also for power. Targaryen rule is not going to survive, in my view, is not going to survive the end of this story. The Targaryens effectively will be wiped out. Some of them, Jon will probably still be alive, but not claiming the throne, and so on. So I don't think that there's going to be a need for it. In terms of its symbolism, as I said, I think it's symbolic of the pursuit of power. It was a Game of Thrones. It was, you play the Game of Thrones, pardon me, and as Cersei says, and you win or you die. That's the whole point of it. This is about people focusing in on sitting on the Iron Throne, and that is one of the big themes, is that blinds them to actually what's happening out in the wider world. So my take is no, it's not going to survive. Whether it will be destroyed in the same way, possibly. I love the symmetry of Drogon's fire melting it in the same way that Balerion the Black Dread's fire apparently forged it. That works really well for me because Drogon is this mirror of Balerion the Black Dread. They're both black, they both breathe the same color fire. There's hints that the characters are very similar as well, but there's hints that Drogon may well be the child of Balerion. So the way that it's set up does have them as mirrors, and I think that it would make sense for him to be melting it, as that's the way that it ends. Victor Surge in the chat saying the very concept of rule should come to an end. Hierarchy challenge. Yeah, I think that this is very true. I think that this is the concept of the one king ruling everyone, I think, will probably not survive. As I always do roughly halfway through this, I'm going to take just a moment just to give you an update on what I'm up to and what to expect over the next while on this channel. What's next is a video on the pink letter. Now, this is the first really in my series of preparing for the Winds of Winter. The pink letter, for those who don't know, this was a letter which was sent to Jon at the Wall right at the end, in his final chapter of A Dance with Dragons. Now, on the show, he quit the Night's Watch after being resurrected and came up with some technicality about how, he had died, therefore he'd fulfilled his promises and all the rest of it. In the books, that's not what happened at all. He was killed because he abandoned his vows. And he abandoned his vows because he received the pink letter, which was basically a taunting letter claiming to be from Ramsay Bolton, saying, "Come on, John, come and attack me." That was what it was about. But there are some reasonably strong hints that this wasn't Ramsay who sent it. This was another person or people with a different agenda. So this is a really important letter, and understanding who sent it and why helps us understand what's going on in the north at that point in the books. So that's happening very soon. I'm going to try and get it out for tomorrow. It may not be tomorrow, but at some point in the next 2 or 3 days, that's going to be coming out. My second channel, I am a little bit behind. If you're a follower of The Well Told Tale, you'll know that I've not released something for a few weeks now. That's because I'm working behind the scenes to get to launch this excitingly as a podcast. So I'm hopefully going to be able to do that in the next few weeks, and then we'll get back to weekly versions of The Well Told Tale. What else? 2 more things. This. Oh yeah, that is an Indie Geek mug. If that excites you, there's a link down in the description. I'm not a good salesman, guys, but I've got merchandise now. If you're interested, have a look at the link. And then the other thing I want to say is patrons, thank you. I really appreciate this. I've told you many times, but I honestly cannot do what I do without your support. So thank you so much. If you're interested in becoming a patron because you want to support the channel or because you want to get access to some stuff I do exclusively for my patrons, like my audio narrations of the pre-release chapters of The Winds of Winter, then do check out, there's a link down in the description. There will be a link at the end of this video as well. So I'd love to have you join over on Patreon. So thank you very much. I think that's all the announcements. So let's get back to the question. We have a question from Donna Daly, or 2 questions which are sort of related. Who do you think will be the point of view characters in A Dream of Spring, and which locations will be in the book? My theory is that every point of view character that at that moment isn't in Westeros and that survives the end of the Winds of Winter will be making their way to Westeros. Once everyone is in Westeros, there won't be the need for so many different point of view characters. Yes, so I agree broadly. I think that A Dream of Spring will be set almost entirely in Westeros. I think that's where we're looking at for this. The main characters will be pulled in. I think that a lot of the characters we're going to start seeing drop away, by which I mean some will die. Some of the point of view characters will die. Victarion, I think, will go. Barristan, I think, will go. We'll start to see a few of the smaller characters go as well. What this means when everybody's in the same place is that we will start seeing things not from everybody's perspective, but just one person's perspective at a time. So in the same way that we saw what happened up at Winterfell at the very beginning of the story, just from one person's perspective at a time as you go, not lots of people all opining about the same thing. I think that we're going to see that happen again. So we will see lots of characters come together. So we'll get like Team Dany together, but that doesn't mean that we're going to get a Daenerys chapter about what's happening in Meereen, and then a Tyrion chapter talking about the exact same thing. I think that we're going to just see different views on different bits of time as we go through it. So that's where I think we're going to end up. And I think that will speed the story along a little bit as well. So whereas it feels like there is a huge amount of story to go, and there is a huge amount of story to go, then I think that this will be slightly speeded up by the way that George R. R. Martin has structured this. Caris Messalina de Valence, which is a fantastic name, says, "Hello, Robert. In previous live streams, you have mentioned that as opposed to unmasking or unmaking the White Walkers, the humans need to understand their motivation and negotiate an agreement with them. Whilst I agree with this view, I'm curious as to how such a negotiation might take place. In terms of communication, I don't recall the White Walkers speaking in a language intelligible to humans in the books. In the show, they do not speak. Yeah, so they do seem to speak in the books. They seem to speak in a language called Skroth, which sounds like screeching across ice. And so they have intelligence, they have culture, they have language. Now, you're right. I've spoken many times about this idea of there potentially being some sort of an agreement, an understanding of their motivations. I think that the show has slightly pushed me towards the view of them needing to be unmade, I have to say. What I think that still stands is the fact that I think that particularly people like Bran will need to gain an understanding of who they are, what they want in the way that we didn't get in the show. Now, with that understanding of what they want will come this idea of how can we then stop what they're doing right now. Now, some sort of pact would work well, but the communication thing, I think you're right, is a huge issue. I think we are probably in the realms of unmaking the magic that created them. That's my current position right now. What we're not going to get, and this is something I have stayed pretty consistent on, I think, all the way through these videos, is what we're not going to get is a scenario where humankind amasses a bigger army and destroys the army of the dead just because they're really good and great at winning battles or something like that. That's not going to happen. Similarly, we're not going to get, I suspect, the same kind of thing we had with Arya killed the Night King, not because she knew, hey, what we need to do right now is to unmake the Night King by plunging Valyrian steel into his heart in front of because she never thought that. That was just an accident that she did the right thing in order to unmake them all. We're not going to get that. What we will get is some kind of intentional thing based off of what Bran learns and discovers about what they are and what they want. Some kind of intentionality about unmaking them in some way that may or may not get rid of all of them. One thing that I always have at the back of my mind is the way that George R. R. Martin says that one thing he dislikes about many fantasy stories is the trope that the bad guys are all the same. The orcs are just one big mass. His view is that that's not actually how anything works. You get a society, you get a huge range of different views and opinions and thoughts, and not all the orcs will feel exactly the same about supporting Sauron. Some of them might, some of them might not. So that's a critique he has of people who have written in the shadow of Tolkien. And I think that will probably play across to where we're at with the others. The others are not just going to be this kind of amorphous mass of all these individuals who are just wanting the exact same thing. It will get slightly more nuanced than that. So it may be a case of stopping some, it may be a case of agreeing something with others. Donald Peoples says or asks, does the weirwood net burn to set right the world and seasons? Oh, that's a big question. I think I covered this a bit last time, but I'll go over it again. So the seasons in Planetos are off kilter for magical reasons, and it seems to be connected with what we know, something to do with um, the weather magic of the Children of the Forest just pushed everything out of kilter. We know that they used weather magic. We know that the others bring the winter with them, not just the weather, but actual proper climate change. They make the things cold. They make this world cold. Um, so the magic is what has put things out of kilter. What will put things back in kilter, therefore, by logically, is just undoing that magic in some way. So this kind of ties into where we were before. Now, the first part of your question about burning the weirwood network, this is a theory that I've talked about before. I know Chris Smokescreen has on my channel. He came over and had a chat on my channel about this. I know various other people who've talked about this as a possibility. The weirwood trees, clearly burning them is the way to destroy them. That is just not just like thematically, this is what we're being told, but this is just logic. This is the way that they would have to die. And if we are to undo the big magic, then it's not just a matter of getting rid of the others, it's a matter of somehow undoing the magic of the Children of the Forest and the weirwood network. Now, my hesitation on this point is down to what we saw on the show. Now, we shouldn't take what we saw on the show as being necessarily 100% right. In fact, a lot of the time we probably shouldn't. But Isaac Hempstead Wright did say that he was told this came from George R. R. Martin, that Bran ended up king. And if that is the case, then I think we have to at least entertain the possibility that the weirwood network survive, the weirwood network win in a way. And that means that the weirwood network will not burn. So I was before very tempted by this idea that at the end of it all, the weirwood network would die. But now I'm slightly less tempted because I'm now kind of thinking that maybe they win. Maybe they do put Bran on the throne. Maybe he does rule as the last Greenseer. Maybe that's what happens. So I love the logic and theory behind the weirwoods must burn theory. But I'm now starting to side with the idea that perhaps the weirwoods won't burn. Sorry. Purple Feline says, really love my new Deep Geek mug. Good, I'm really pleased. Thank you so much. Following on from Karis's question, which was about the White Walkers and the others, what do you think will be the terms of a new pact? Particularly, do you think this will require sacrifice to the weirwoods? And what textual clues or evidence do we have for what will happen? So yeah, I think this is kind of building on what we've been talking about just for a moment ago, from not just from Karis, but also from Donald. I think that any magic requires sacrifice. This is the other aspect to this, is that if you were going to perform magic in any way, and I think that includes undoing magic, then you need some kind of sacrifice. We've seen this all the way across. Melisandre talks about it all the time, but we see it in every kind of magic that happens. We see it in Euron strapping priests and all the rest of it to the front of his boats, hoping that they die and they will be a sacrifice for the weirdy magic that he's trying to do. The notion of sacrifice is throughout of A Song of Ice and Fire connected with magic. So what the question is, what sort of sacrifice? Now, we already know of one sacrifice that, and it won't necessarily be exactly like this. In fact, I'm pretty sure it won't be like this, which is why I'm hesitating saying it. But we get the Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa myth, which is Azor Ahai plunged his sword into Nissa Nissa, his lover. That created Lightbringer, this magical sword which won the day. So we already have this story, which has been mentioned several times all the way through, with a clear implication that may well happen in the present day in some way. And we kind of saw a hint of that in what happened with Jon and Daenerys, that Jon clearly killed Daenerys. That wasn't with a view to creating or forging this magical sword, but I think it gives us this hint that that's there. Now, the important point here is that Azor Ahai has always been presented as this hero figure, and actually, when you think about it, is that heroic? To be killing your lover, plunging a sword into their heart? That doesn't sound very heroic to me. So I think George R. R. Martin is going to be playing around with this idea. This is not the heroes coming up with this great plan of how to win, and yay, this is great, we've done it, well done. This is going to be some people suggesting we need to do sacrifice in order to get this victory. Who do we sacrifice, and is this worth it? We see this in what happened, particularly through Melisandre's story on the show with Shireen. That will happen in a slightly different context, I suspect, but it will happen in the books as well with Shireen. She will be sacrificing people. People like Davos are going to be the counterpoint, saying, why are you doing this? This makes you evil. And I think that he's going to give us this kind of moral conundrum about, yes, there's clearly a greater good which happens here, but does that justify this clearly evil act in the short term? So I think that that's the kind of the overall feel that we're going to be going with. Tara W says, I'm looking forward to Dunk and Egg more than The Winds of Winter. Do we know how many of those books there will be? I want more about the tragedy of Summerhall. Okay, I will tell you everything I know about the books that we're going to get on Dunk and Egg. If you've never read Dunk and Egg, I highly recommend it. There are 3 stories so far. They're not full books each. They're like novellas. So they're all collected under Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, very easily read. So what George R. R. Martin has said is that he intends to write these stories covering the entirety of Dunk and Egg's life. Now, that goes all the way up to the tragedy at Summerhall. So the last Dunk and Egg story will be about the tragedy at Summerhall and will tell us, I hope, what actually happened there. Now, George R. R. Martin, as is his way, has said, okay, so I was originally intending to do 5 or 6 books, and then maybe 7. The last I heard, he was talking about doing at least a dozen books. And when you look at it, he's done 3, and Egg is still a child. Dunk is, he's not nowhere near an old man. He's still a young man. There is a lot of story for them still to come. So I think that there are a lot of books. I think that we can expect to see the next one, which I think is tentatively called She-Wolves of Winterfell, reasonably soon after the Winds of Winter. So the next one, I don't know. Whenever you expect the Winds of Winter, I think you can add on 6 months to a year. This is quite a short story, and then we will see the next Dunk and Egg story. Beyond that, I think we're looking years. But the plan is definitely to take it all the way up to their ultimate deaths. Monkey Trong says Duncan Egg audiobooks are the best bedtime stories. Yeah, they're amazing. I highly recommend. Maura Lee asks, will we finally get to read what House Dayne's words are? George R. R. Martin said that they are spoilery. Yeah, so for those who don't know, House Dayne, who have this great magical sword called Dawn, the member of House Dayne who is deemed worthy enough to wield it is the Sword of the Morning. There are huge amounts of kind of like hints that there's something going on with that family which is linked with the end of the long night. What happens at the end of the long night? Dawn, morning. So there's these clear hints that's going on there. Added to which we get Arthur Dayne, who is Rhaegar Targaryen's best friend. We get Shire Dayne, who is everyone's favorite subject of speculation and tinfoil theories. They were clearly very important characters around the sort of the start of this story in Robert's Rebellion. So George R. R. Martin has said that we do not yet know House Dayne's family words because they're a bit spoilery. We always speculate about what these are, but it's going to be something along the lines of "We bring the dawn" or something like that. I feel sure. The sword itself will be important in the battle against the others. That much I'm reasonably certain of. And will we get to find out what their words are? Yes, I'm absolutely sure that's true. Mod Mary says Dawn is Lightbringer. Yeah, I've certainly heard that thought lots of times. The Dawn is a milk glass color. It's not like a normal steel sword. This was not just made from Valyrian steel. This was made from a comet which crashed to Earth, and then they forged the metal from that meteorite and turned that into a sword, and it's thousands of years old. So this is not just a normal sword. This is something absolutely special. And George R. R. Martin has basically said that, yeah, this is his favorite sword, and there's something special going to happen with it. So good question. Jared says, since the books have yet to introduce a Night King, it seems unlikely that a White Walker will ride a dragon in the remaining books. Besides Dany and Jon, who do you think is most likely to ride a dragon? Do you think Euron will be able to successfully use the horn to subdue one of the dragons? Okay. So, I liked the imagery in the show of the three dragons having one which is ridden by the Night King, this symbol of ice, one which is ridden by Daenerys, this symbol of fire, and one which is ridden by Jon, being the symbol of ice and fire, being both Targaryen and Stark. So I really liked that, I have to say. I think that worked. That may or may not happen. I think there's a possibility that Euron will. I think that certainly one of Daenerys's dragons is going to be taken by one of her enemies. I think that Jon will indeed end up riding Rhaegal, the dragon named after his father. I think that is going to happen. Just on the Night King thing, George R. R. Martin always, when he's talking about the Night King, talks about it in reference to the Night's King, which is a character that he came up with, a legendary character who presumably we're never going to see, but this 13th Lord Commander who turned away from their vows and consorted with the others. So he certainly sees the two as a sort of a parallel. So whereas we will not see the Night King in the books, I think there's a possibility, no more than a possibility, but a possibility we might see the Night's King. We've seen so little in the books of the others at the moment. We will see a lot more in the Winds of Winter, and that's when we'll get to figure out whether or not they do have a leader, so to speak. The creation of the Night King was a show thing because they wanted to have a character who everybody could sort of see as the kind of the encapsulation of what it is to be a White Walker. That's not going to happen on the show, but that doesn't mean that they don't have some kind of leader or characters or differentiation between different characters. Fernzilla says, will Jon's parentage matter in the books since it didn't in the show? Yeah, so it didn't matter in terms of it didn't mean that he became king. But I find myself saying this quite a lot. What I think they were trying to do on the show was to show that the fact that he discovered his identity was the catalyst for so much of what happened next. So that led to the disruption with Sansa, that led to the disruption of the relationship between Jon and Daenerys, that led to the fracturing of the alliance, which led to Daenerys doing what she did at King's Landing. So I think what they were trying to show was that actually it did make a difference. Because and although I don't like all of this logic, there's a whole load of stuff I could say about this, but the implication was that if Jon was actually not who he, not a Targaryen, then he would have happily stayed with Daenerys, and the two of them would have been close, and then she wouldn't have done what she did, and all would have been well. That is all very problematic for a whole range of reasons that I'm not going to go into, but that seems to be what they were saying on the show, that it did matter what Jon's parentage is. In the books, yes, I think it will matter. I think it will matter for some of the same reasons, but also thematically, where we're at with Jon is that Jon is going to start to appear to be the hero character. He is going to start taking on a lot more obviously this trope of being the king in waiting, this orphan boy who was raised in the castle, not knowing that they were really the heir to the kingdom, and not knowing that they were really this child of prophecy, that not knowing that they were really going to save the world from all the baddies threatening it, and not knowing that one day they will inherit and sit on the throne, and all will be well. That is the trope that is going to be created for Jon Snow, and I think that George R. R. Martin will play against that. But before he can play against that, he has to create that trope, and that, I think, is what he's going to do. Is he is going to show that Jon is this character, this great king in waiting, this great hero who's going to destroy the baddies, and after that, then he's going to walk away. I think that is what's going to happen. So it did matter on the show. They didn't show it very well, but I think that they meant to show that it mattered, and it will matter in the books, but more in a kind of a literary and thematic sense than in terms of the action. Millie asks, hi Millie, says, will Lady Stoneheart be around to find out Jon's true parentage? It would be very emotional for her to finally understand why Ned did what he did, but also perhaps tragic if she never discovers. So Lady Stoneheart, I said last time, I think Lady Stoneheart, her story is going to carry on all the way through to A Dream of Spring. My take on this is that Lady Stoneheart's character arc is not the same as Catelyn Stark's character arc. Catelyn Stark, had she survived, yes, her character arc would have been about understanding what happened with Ned and Jon and all the rest of it. Lady Stoneheart died and was brought back, and all that is left for her is vengeance. She is driven for vengeance against those who did wrong, as against her family. Now, that arc comes to an end when she feels that she's achieved that vengeance, and when she discovers that actually her family are not all as hard done by as she feared. Arya wasn't handed over to Ramsay Bolton. Sansa may have gone missing, but she was safe-ish in the Eyrie. Bran and Rickon weren't killed. They both survived. So I think that her character arc comes to an end once she realizes that things that drive her actually don't need to drive her. Jon, it will be tragic if she learns about Jon, but actually it doesn't matter to her, because she has lost who she is. She has lost a lot of Catelyn Stark. Her love for Ned may well not be there anymore. It may just be replaced with this desire for vengeance. So I think we need to know a little bit more about her before we can come to a firm conclusion about what how she would react to this news about Jon, but that is certainly a long way away still. She was there when Robb probably wrote his will legitimizing Jon. So, and she was broadly on side with that. So I think what I'm saying is that her character arc is not dependent on Jon Snow in the way that we might think, because she is Lady Stoneheart. She's not Catelyn Stark. That makes sense. How are we doing for time? We're doing great for time. Okay, Christian Isidoro says, Robert, I hope you're well. I am, thank you. I'll just repurpose the last minute question I had from last week. Actually, incidentally, patrons, I should probably just say here, if you get your questions in during this live stream, I sometimes miss them because I can't read the questions that are there while I'm doing this. So yeah, please do try and make sure they get in before the live stream, before I go live, so that I can pick up on them, because I am really keen on answering your questions. But Christian's question was, do you think the ability of the others to raise the dead might have any sort of effect, detrimental or otherwise, on characters who have been resurrected, like Beric, Cat, or Jon? I think no. I think that there are different types of white. George R. R. Martin's kind of hinted at this. He says that there are ice whites and there are fire whites, and these are different. And it's what is different is the power that animates them. And also what is left of the person. So the ice whites, what we generally consider to be the whites, they may have some residual knowledge and understanding of the world, but they're not a resurrected version of that person. That's not what they are. Oh, pardon me. They are, to all intents and purposes, the way that Bran goes into Hodor's mind, pushes his mind to one side and controls him and moves him around, that is what is happening to these whites. That the dead body is being inhabited by the control of the White Walkers, the others, and that's what's moving them around. And so they would have to physically push out the the actual mind of those fire wights, which I don't think is going to be happening. So the short answer is no, I don't think so. I think these are different sorts of magic. So I don't think that that's actually where we're going to go with this story. Howland's little sister says, Robert, due to my love of history, factual and fictional based, I can't help but wonder about the Targaryens and other families from Valyria before the Doom. And I find myself thinking about why the Targaryens left. Let's assume the Targaryens were struggling with the power base at that time. Would those good-bad attributes carry over into their new life on Westeros and the way the Targaryens conquered and ruled their new subjects? Okay, so this takes us back to old Valyria, before the Doom. So before the Doom of Valyria, which was basically the downfall of this ancient civilization, imagine a massive volcano, Krakatoa type destruction of the entire civilization. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. But the Targaryens had escaped beforehand. They were one of 40 ruling houses, but they were one of the smaller ruling houses, so they didn't have any huge amount of power there. Then Dayne the Dreamer, were one of the Targaryens, had this vision of Valyria being destroyed, so she persuaded the family to move all the way over to Dragonstone. That's what happened, and then sometime later, the Doom of Valyria happened. The Targaryen survived and became the last remaining Valyrian family, as it were. Now, what of that will have affected how they lived their new life? The one thing which has always fascinated me is the fact that whereas the Valyrians very strongly practiced slavery, that wasn't something that the Targaryens brought across. They and we're never told exactly why that is, but the clear implication is that they don't want to do the slavery thing. That's pretty much it. Now, in terms of the sort of the good bad attributes, the lack of slaves is one thing, but the feeling that they are born to rule is also a carryover. I think that the fact that they are the last proper Valyrian family, when I say proper, there are others, the Velaryons and so on, but in terms of the dragon riders, they're the last proper dragon riding Valyrian family. I think that they felt that they ruled by right and that they were superior to others. And I think that that followed them all the way through to when they became kings. Because let's face it, it takes a certain kind of person to go to an entire continent and say, right, I'm in charge now. This is all mine. All of you have to pay fealty to me. That takes a certain amount of chutzpah, it takes a certain amount of arrogance, it takes a certain amount of self-belief, which clearly all of those Targaryens had. They felt they deserved to rule. So that, I think, is what has taken the main attributes that they've taken across from Old Valyria into their rule in Westeros. This was sort of turned, but Jaehaerys the First turned this from being just a sort of a general feeling of superiority into an actual doctrine that the Targaryens, being Valyrians, are different and not to be judged by the same rules and laws that everyone else must be judged by, which is a very kind of shorthand way of saying that the Valyrians are better than everyone else. You're not allowed to judge them. So I think that they brought that kind of sense of cultural superiority, if we put it in as a nice way. They brought that with them. which lasted down through the generations, and we see it certainly in people like Viserys, but I think one could argue that there is a degree of entitlement in Daenerys as well. Pia Hubner says, may it be that the children of the forest finally triumph by their new tool, King Bran. Could we expect to see them again? Was this all the purpose of Black Raven's, Howland Reed's, Lyanna's, Mira's, Jojen's, Benjen's, and Hodor's life? Megan V, welcome. I see I'm horribly late. You say I'm not even off work until 5:30. That said, I was the first to like the stream. Thank you very much. But Pia's saying, can we expect to see the Children of the Forest again? And was all of this a big plan? In terms of the big plan, yes. Certainly on the show, that was what they were trying to tell us, was that this was all a big plan, right pretty much from the beginning, to be putting Bran onto the Iron Throne, or into the throne of Westeros. Could we expect to see them again? Well, yes. I think if the Isle of Faces survives, then I think that there's a good chance that there are some Children of the Forest on the Isle of Faces, and so we may well see them again later in the books. Yes, they were up at Bloodraven's cave, but I think they are probably not going to survive in the same way they didn't survive on the show. So, yeah, I think we may well see them again. I think this was a huge plan. I think that the plan goes back even further than we saw on the show. This is the last video I will do in my Robert's Rebellion series. I've got a couple to do before that, but the last video I do will be about how Bloodraven and Howland Reed were influencing events right from the very start, right from even before the turning at Harrenhal. They were right there influencing events as they went along in order to get the ending that they wanted. Maura Lee says, will we see the scouring of the Shire in the final book version of The Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring? Will we see a final resolution of character story arcs that makes sense? Unlike some of the ones on the show that perhaps didn't make sense. Yeah, I think we're going to see character arcs make sense in the books. In terms of the scouring of the Shire, yes, we will. I will do a video on this at some point, but George R. R. Martin has been very clear that the feel of the scouring of the Shire, which is the penultimate chapter of The Lord of the Rings, that feel is what he wants from the ending of A Game of Thrones. So we will get the feel of the scouring of the Shire at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, what does that mean? It's not going to be, as I've said before, it's not going to be a cut and paste, but the scouring the Shire is right at the end when the hobbits return home. The big bad has been destroyed. All of the big plot things have been resolved, and they go home to discover that actually, you know what, one of the other baddies is there in their home and is making everything terrible. And so they have got to use, they're broken and changed by their experiences, but they have to use what they've learned and their skills to save the Shire. That is basically what goes on in the scouring of the Shire, and they succeed. So what does that mean for A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, I think it means that once the big threat or threats have been dealt with, the main characters are going to look around and go, okay, what's left? And I think that once the threat from the others from the Army of the Dead has been dealt with, they will look around and go, okay, so Euron and Cersei say, are now back in control of King's Landing. What are we going to do about that? And that's the point at which they have to go and clear them out before they can start to rebuild, because until those people have been turfed out and probably killed, they cannot start to rebuild. So that's the kind of the feel that we've got here, and I think that is, again, it was kind of echoed in the show, but I think it's going to be a lot stronger in the books. That what we're looking at is this deep breath after the destruction of all the things that have been the baddies that have been driving the plot forward so far, looking around and what else do we have to do now to save, our home, which I think in this instance will probably be King's Landing for the Shire. Tronic says or asks, I remember you saying that in A Song of Ice and Fire, the future and the past are already set. Like you said, Hodor was always meant to hold the door. I did say that. And other things along those lines. So why then would Bloodraven and Bran need to manipulate events if things were already set and are going to happen? Well, this is probably the bit of the plot that we have to kind of stretch our brains most for. The way that this world seems to be is in a kind of a closed time loop, that things that happen always were going to have happened. So when Bran goes back and calls out to his father through the weirwood tree, and Ned hears it and says, "Who's there?" It's not that when Bran did that, that created a new reality in the past. Actually, that had always happened. Ned had always, many years earlier, sat there and heard this voice and called out. That had always happened. In the same way that in a slightly more complicated time loop, Hodor always was going to have held the door. That was what was going to happen, and there was no way around it. But these things still need the proper points of causation to happen. They are, to use a Doctor Who term, fixed moments in time. They have to happen. So when we're saying why would Bloodraven and Bran need to manipulate events, they're not manipulating events so much as doing their bit in making things happen that always were going to have happened. They can see what happens in the future. They can see what they need to do, and so they just go about and do it. That is the kind of the feel that we're getting from this. So yeah, it's not about them manipulating, it's about them being a part of the flow of history and them knowing what it is that they need to do in order for that to happen. Fred Versteeg says, will the Dothraki really follow Dany? They seem to hate and fear magic, and will they promise to end their way of life, that is, build on enslaved people and selling them to some of the free cities? Or will Dany just use them to defeat her enemies in Essos but leave them behind? Right, so I think Dany will, in the books, in a similar way to the show, gain control of the Dothraki. I think that's reasonably clear that that's what's going to be happening. There were clear hints in Dany's visions in the House of the Undying, and it kind of makes sense plot-wise that that's what's about to happen. So she will gain control of the Dothraki. They will come south down to Meereen. They will help her out there. The question is, are they going to come with her? And I think probably yes. I think that if she tells them to, if she is claiming to be their Carl, they should follow her wherever she leads them. And so, yes, they should get on boats and go all the way across the sea. What she promises them there is a different matter. Whether she promises that once she's claimed the Seven Kingdoms, they can go back, I don't know. I don't think it matters huge amounts for the actual story, but I think that He definitely will get control of them. They definitely will come down to Marine, and I think that she will get them onto the boats and across to Westeros, because that's just kind of makes sense. Donna Daly says, do you think there will be any more OMG, I can't believe that happened deaths in the last book? Yes. So the showrunners said that there were 3 moments that George R. R. Martin told them about that were these kind of OMG moments. The first was Hodor. The second was Shireen. So I think we can expect to see something very similar happening with Shireen in probably the Winds of Winter. And the third, they said, was going to happen in season 8. We've not heard yet back from them exactly what moment it was that they thought was this final OMG WTF moment, but I think it's pretty clear it was Jon killing Dany. I think that that's what they were building towards. So that will happen in the final book, towards the end of the final book. I think it will happen. I did years ago a video which was called something like Will Jon Kill Daenerys, which was based on Dany's visions in the House of the Undying. I had logic there. It's very long-winded, but if you're interested, go and try and check out that video. But yeah, I think that the clear implications are that he will kill her, and I think that will be the final OMG moment that we're going to be looking for. I have got a couple more questions from my patrons, and then let's dig into some questions from the chat after that. Somebody's saying great questions tonight. Yeah, they are. The questions are going all over the place, but I'm loving it. It's giving a chance to sort of explore all the different angles about where this story is going to be going. So now is the time to drop any other questions in the chat. If you want, I will get to these final couple of questions from my patrons, and I shall dive into the chat. And we'll go for another quarter of an hour or so, I reckon. John St. Baptiste says, this is pretty ambiguous, but do you think the ending is going to be wrapped up in a bow as much as the series, or do you think more will be left to the reader's imagination? By the way, I've started making new music content. I hope you can check it out. Yeah, guys, for those who don't know, John St. Baptiste, who's a patron of mine, has a channel of his own. So please do go check that out if you like music. He's quite a huge music fan and produces, well, I won't spoil it for you. Go, and if you're a fan of music in the UK, if you're like a Six Music kind of person, I don't know what the equivalent is in America, but if you're liking good, well-made music, go and check out John St. Baptiste. In terms of the question, will the ending be as wrapped up in a bow as much as the series, or will there be more left to the reader's imagination? I think the main storylines will be wrapped up. I think the character arcs will be dealt with. In terms of what's left to the reader's imagination, I think that what we're going to see is well, the nature of the story is that we're going to see things from different perspectives. So we're going to be left to debate the extent to which what one person sees and thinks and understands is actually what happened, or whether or not that's just their interpretation of events. So I think that is more likely rather than just leaving things to our imagination. But character stories will, I'm pretty sure, definitely be brought to an end. So we will see, in the same way that, say, Sansa comes full circle, I think that we're going to see that in the books. I think that we're going to see a very similar end for Jon, things like that. I think the story arcs will come to their own natural conclusion in the books, the same way they did on the show. The difference is that whereas the ending points might be the same, how they got there, I suspect, will probably be quite different. And that is quite important because it means that things will A, not be rushed, and B, will start to make a whole lot more sense if there other events happen along the way or don't happen. So, for example, Brienne and Jaime on the show, they were together. Well, we didn't actually see them together, to be honest, on the show. We saw them get together. We saw Jaime and Tyrion talking about the fact that Jaime had set up home with Brienne, and then we saw Jaime wake up and head off back down south. We never actually saw them together as a couple, and yet they were for a few weeks or even months, based purely on the timelines that we're told. I think that in the books, we will get a much better feel for that. And perhaps through that, we will get a much better understanding of what on earth was going on in Jaime's mind during that time. So things will be a lot clearer. But the endings may well be similar-ish. I'll put it that way. So, for example, on Jaime, as we're on the subject, I'm going off on one here, but on Jaime, I could well imagine that George R. R. Martin said Jaime and Cersei will die together in the ruins of King's Landing. That leaves open to wide interpretation what that might mean. I suspect they won't just die from falling masonry, but hey, who knows? Maybe they will. Morgan R.R. Hayes, thank you so much. Just saying hi, got here late. You are very welcome. And the last question from my patrons are from Maura Lee saying, Jaqen H'ghar is in the Citadel looking for the book on how to get rid of dragons. What role will he take on in the last 2 books? Do you think he will find the book? And how do you think his story arc will complete? I'll be honest, I think that Jaqen H'ghar and the Faceless Men are one of the hardest storylines to predict, but hey, let's go for it. The Faceless Men, I argued in a series of videos a couple of years ago. If you're interested, there's a whole playlist on, I think, called something like Magic Maesters and the Faceless Men. One part of which suggested that what the Faceless Men, in fact, I'm not suggesting it, this is what I think is the case. The Faceless Men is not just a cool assassins guild with some nice catchphrases. When they say all men must die, that's not just something that sounds quite mystical and cool. This is actually a statement of faith. When they worship the god of death, that's what they're about. Their temple is just a place for people to come to die. They take contracts for people to kill people, so they die. That's what they're about. And when they start seeing things that are stopping this natural order of events of people dying, like the others, like Qyburn and everything else going on, they're going to want to try and stop it. So that's why they are getting involved in the world. Yes, Jaqen H'ghar is trying to find this book called The Death of Dragons. I think he probably will find it. I think that the library will burn. Euron is just off the coast, and I think that he's just going to take out Old Town. I think that the Great Library, which is a mirror of the Great Library of Alexandria, will burn. I think that we're going to get a couple of exciting chapters of people frantically rescuing books from there and taking them off. Sam will take some and head north. I think Jaqen H'ghar, who's currently there hiding, pretending to be Pate, is also going to steal a book or 2 and head off. So that's where they're at. I think that they will collect it, and I think that they will play a role, as the Maesters did before, in ending the dragons if they need to. I think that it may well be that what we're going to have is that a couple of the dragons effectively kill each other, and we get a final dragon who's left. We did on the show, of course, Drogon, and I think that there will be a lot of people with a vested interest to stop that dragon from surviving. So I don't think that final dragon is just going to fly off without a care in the world. I think that final dragon will have a whole load of people trying to get rid of it, and I think that the Faceless Men are going to be among them. Sheely NY, thank you so much for the super sticker. That's very kind. Swole Rouge, oh, that's very generous. Thank you so much. Saying you're my favorite channel for a Song of Ice and Fire content. That is all. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's really kind. So that I think is the end of my questions from my patrons. So let's have a quick dig through the chat just to see what we've got. What Mary asks, will we find out if Varys and young Griff are really Blackfires? I don't think we will ever get the final evidence, but I think that we will get yet more hints that they probably are. I think that we will, for example, Illyrio will magically find the sword Blackfire and give it to Aegon, and I think that that will be used, isn't it? Because this used to be the great ancestral sword of the Targaryens, but clearly it also has this kind of flip side that this was the sword of the Blackfires. So I think that we will start getting extra hints along the way that, yes, these are Blackfires. Johnny Skinwalker says they must hate it when someone brings people back to life. Yep, talking about the Faceless Men, absolutely, I agree completely. What else have we got? Victor Serge says, doesn't Connington have the sword? I think so. We don't know exactly who's got the sword at the moment, the sword Blackfire, but there was it was actually left out of the final draft, but we get Illyrio talking about he has to tell young Griff about the sword, and so I think that he has it and he's been keeping hold of it. I've got long and complicated reasons how he might have got hold of it to start with, connected with the Golden Company, but I think he has it, and I think that he will get it to Aegon at some point. Andrew K asking, what do you think the exact role for Nymeria's wolf pack will be against the whites or others? In the text, believe bone killing kills whites also. Yeah, so for those who don't know, Nymeria, who is Arya's direwolf, she didn't just disappear. She went into the Riverlands and amassed a super pack of wolves. George R. R. Martin has been very clear they will have a role. Now, what their role has been so far has been doing a whole series of attacks, first of all, just sort of ranging across the Riverlands, but most recently attacks against the Freys and various other people who you might count as being enemies of the Starks. And Arya has got a very strong spirit bond with Nymeria, and quite often when she's asleep in particular, sort of bargs into her. So I think what we're looking at is that they are one of 3 Stark forces who will be in the Riverlands over the course of the next 2 books. One is Lady Stoneheart, second is this super pack, and third will be Arya when she returns. I think that there's a very real chance that they will join up with Lady Stoneheart in an attack on the Freys. I think that they may well also join up with Arya when Arya comes back, and if Arya goes up to the wall, they may well have an involvement in any battle against the others up north as well. Yeah, I agree that they will bone breaking. Whether it kills whites, it certainly will slow them down. So I think that they will be very important in that battle. To Dawson 68, Dawson says, what was the origin of the Tower of Joy? So the Tower of Joy is only ever mentioned as the Tower of Joy once. We talk about it huge amounts. Only ever mentioned by name as the Tower of Joy once in the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire. And that is to say that Ned remembers that that's what Rhaegar named it. It was there already. What it is a tower. What it was, because it was brought down by Ned. It was a tower on apparently a watchtower. It would seem to make sense on the Prince's Pass, which is this pass through the mountains which connects Dorne and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. So that's what it was. That was the purpose of it. And that Rhaegar went there, one can only assume, not just because he thought, oh, there's a nice tower, I hope nobody cares if I sit in it, but because he had links to Dorne, because he was married to Elia Martell. So they will have cleared the way for him to be set up there. Before it may have had a name, we don't know. It may have just been Watchtower number 37, as far as we're concerned. It was Rhaegar who named it the Tower of Joy. It's not it wasn't like a big castle that anyone knew about beforehand. It was just a random place. What Mary says, George R. Martin says that Melisandre is one of the most misunderstood characters. Yeah, absolutely. He said she is the most misunderstood character. I talked actually. I had a quick chat with Grey Area, for those who know her channel, and at some point we've got a collaboration appearing on her channel, which please do go and check that one out, where we're talking about Melisandre. And we talked about this, and yeah, I think we were in agreement that it's she's misunderstood because she's not purely evil, because she believes what she's doing is right. That's the fundamental point about Melisandre, is that yes, she's doing a huge amounts of morally dubious things, but she fundamentally believes what she is trying to do is save the world. She thinks she's trying to save every single human being on the planet. And maybe she has to sacrifice a couple of people along the way in order to do that, but that's the price of saving everybody else. So she actually thinks that she is the hero of all of this. So yes, I think she is indeed misunderstood. Chris Stanley, thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. Just saying, keep it up. I certainly will, certainly in terms of making the videos. I'm starting to struggle now, so I'm going to just take a couple more questions before we end. Let's have a quick flick through. We've got yeah, Mod Mary says, you don't put a pack of wolves in a story, then not use them. That's what George R. R. Martin said. So the dire wolves will definitely definitely have a role to play. Girl Nettles says, who are the thousands of lords of Winterfell in the crypts denying guest right too? Will they be resurrected as indestructible statues to fight the dead? Yeah, again, this refers to a video that I did a long time ago called something like The Horn of Winter and the Crypts of Winterfell, or something like that. I am firmly of the belief that the dead Starks underneath Winterfell will be called back to come and fight against the others. I think that is the role. I think that that's what the Horn of Winter does, and so I think that they will be brought back. They are denying guest right, I think, to the others, and just in terms of, will they be resurrected as indestructible statues? No, I think they will be resurrected as ghosts or the like, spirits. I think that that's what will happen. We have to remember, I think, that we just think about the statues down there. The statues are just that they made statues of the Stark kings. But all of the Starks, as far as we can tell, all Starks were buried down there. So we get this when Ned goes down there right at the very beginning of a Game of Thrones, and he thinks about where the graves effectively have already been, or the tombs are already there for him and for his children. And it's like, and Arya remembers playing around their own tombs. So it seems clear that all Starks are buried there. It's the thing with the statues was that it should just have been the Lord of Winterfell who gets the statue, and Ned broke that tradition by doing statues for Lyanna and Brandon. But it should be all Starks who are down there. So when you think back a few thousand years of Starks, that's a lot of Starks. That's quite a sizable army that could be brought back. So yeah, I think that that's what's going on. There was, I think I got, Andrew K says Dun Harrow 2.0. Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I think that we a nod to the dead men of Dun Harrow, who, if you don't know, is a Lord of the Rings Tolkien thing. Donald Peoples says, thank you so much, saying, great stream, always a pleasure, Robert. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, I think with that, I will start to draw this one to a close. For those who are watching this back later, then as usual, there will be appearing somewhere up here. There will be a link to other live streams I've done appearing up here. Will be a link to my Patreon page, or possibly the other way around. I can never remember. If you're interested in supporting this channel or getting access to some of the stuff I do exclusively for my patrons. Thank you, guys. I've really enjoyed this. I will be back next week with some more content. Possibly also a special guest as well. Fantastic questions today. Thank you, my patrons. Thank you to everyone in the chat. I will see you again next time. Take care.